It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
We've got to press on with these reforms. The current system isn't working, and in the end, it's a stark choice.
That was on Tuesday, but today, as more than 120 Labour MPs threaten to rebel, a dramatic change in tone from the Prime Minister on welfare reform.
All colleagues want to get this right, and so do I. We want to see reform implemented with Labour values of fairness. That conversation will continue in the coming days so we can begin making change together on Tuesday.
So many people, so high numbers, people from lots of different places, which is not what immigration used to look like. And I think we need to move from passive to active integration. That's something which is along the lines of what you were describing in Denmark.
The Conservative leader takes inspiration from the controversial model of integration adopted in Denmark. Could it work in the UK? And Nigel Farage wants mining to be restarted in Wales. Is bringing back coal an election-winning strategy? Joining us today, Labour MP Catherine Atkinson, Conservative MP Neil Shastri-Hurst, Plaid Cymru MP Liz Saville-Roberts, and talk presenter and former Brexit Party MEP Alex Phillips. This is Politics Live. So we heard there the Prime Minister talking about his welfare reforms. There's due to be a vote on all of this in the House of Commons on Tuesday. And of course, the government has a whopping working majority of 165. But the plans do seem to be in trouble and there is a huge Labour rebellion brewing. So, Catherine, with that huge majority, he can't get one of his flagship policies through, it seems. Do you think the UK has become ungovernable?
Well, I think that all Labour MPs would agree that the welfare system that we inherited is broken, that it's failing people and that it desperately needs to be reformed. And I think we're all in agreement about many of the principles. We want to ensure that those who will never be able to work stop having reassessments and are better supported. We want to ensure that we get that £1 billion so that we are supporting those who can work back into work, and we want people to have the right to try. I think we need to remember that we're in the really early stages. Next week is the start, it's a vote on the principles, but there will still then be the committee stage, there'll be the report stage where we get to vote on amendments. And I think that Labour MPs are doing their job. They're scrutinising, they are holding to account, and it's really good that ministers are engaging and listening.
Neil, Boris Johnson had a large majority and he didn't last that long either. Do you think there's a problem here?
I think there's a real challenge for Keir Starmer, and in many ways it feels like the wheels are coming off the bus because we're less than a year into his premiership and already he is facing mounting dissent on the backbenches. He's struggling to get through a flagship policy, and it suggests that he's not only out of touch with elements of the country, but he's also out of touch with his backbenchers.
But this happened to Boris Johnson as well, didn't it?
Well, look, we are talking about the Labour Party are in charge now, that Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister. We know what happened in history. We can look back at that or we can look forward. There are some significant issues around welfare reform that need to take place. In that sense, I encourage the government to be bold, but they've got to do so in a responsible way. And that means taking time, getting sure that the reforms are right, protecting the most vulnerable in society. But if you can't take with you on that journey your own backbenches, you're already facing a significant problem.
Liz, do you think that the UK has become ungovernable?
I think it's very interesting that we're less than a year into this government and we have, 120 plus Labour backbench MPs rebelling on this, although it is fair to say that actually only 5, I think, from Wales have rebelled on this. And it will have a particular impact on Wales, given the nature of our communities and our post-industrial society. But also, we've got to bear in mind that although the government are talking about concessions to their backbenchers, nonetheless, the bill has been published and we're now going into second reading with the bill as it has been published. And what degree that the government is going to be prepared to change this, or are they just saying this to try and satisfy their backbenchers, is a really interesting question, what they can actually do. But I think just to take a step back and look at the larger pattern here, this is a government that is behaving as though they have 4 and a little bit more years to go. They're going to be held to account in Wales next year in May. We've not got a very long time to that, and that's going to be a really interesting vote, considering the level of dissatisfaction that we're seeing.
Alex, are you surprised that a government with a massive majority is struggling so soon?
No, not at all, actually, because I think something about ill discipline and lack of a collegiate nature in politics really came home to roost during the Brexit campaign. And I think now you've got MPs who are looking at their own majorities in their seats, looking at the number of people receiving PIP payments and thinking, I want to sustain my position. And so there's a degree of self-interest that comes into this. I think the politics, if we're all going to vote together because we follow our leader and we're all part of one party, is a thing of the past and was truly fractured in 2016 and the years that followed that. And I have a great amount of sympathy, as I think the opposition party probably does, because it is very clear welfare reform is so desperately needed. So it'll be interesting to see how the Conservatives go on this one.
Let's speak now to our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. I mean, it is extraordinary that it's come to this so soon with that massive majority, isn't it? Do you think it's a situation here, as Alex says, that MPs are becoming so independent that the UK is ungovernable?
I think it's all sorts of things at once, Vicky, but absolutely combining into a really serious crisis for the government, principally because of that staggering reality that it's not even a year since Sir Keir Starmer won a working majority of more than 150. I think most people, I think certainly Downing Street, thought that he would never, ever be at any risk of ever losing a vote in the House of Commons until the next general election in 4 or 5 years' time. Evidently, that was not the case here. So, yeah, I think it's partly about MPs looking at their inboxes or their social media feeds or what they're hearing at their surgeries about PIP, but there's all sorts of other grievances overlaid on top of it about the direction of the Labour Party. There are people involved in this rebellion who thought they were going to get ministerial jobs from Keir Starmer and didn't. There are people involved in this rebellion who never wanted ministerial jobs for themselves but think the people who did get them shouldn't have got them. There's all sorts going on. I could literally go on about the list of grievances that's been given to me for ages, but it would take over the whole programme.
Well, Henry, in our headlines, we heard Keir Starmer saying that he was going to press on. I mean, is that remotely feasible at this stage?
No. I mean, he's not going to press on with the bill as it stood, because the political reality is catching up with the mathematical reality that if he did, he'd lose on Tuesday. But I think the government does want to win a vote on welfare on Tuesday. And the question for the coming hours and coming days is what kind of text they can thrash out that will enable Keir Starmer to win this vote in the House of Commons on Tuesday on the second reading principles, as Catherine was saying, before perhaps deferring some of those still very difficult conversations about the specifics for later stages.
What does this all say about the Downing Street operation? I mean, I've heard people... There's a bit of a blame game going on, isn't there, already?
Oh, there's an extraordinary blame game going on. I mean, you know, just look at the pieces we've had by Ian Watson and me and Harry Farley on the BBC website over the last couple of days, and also some of the stuff in the newspapers this morning. I mean, it's never a good sign for a Prime Minister when people are taking aim by name at some of their non-public figures, and today the name is Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Of course, the Prime Minister's already sacked one Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, or Baroness Gray of Tottenham as she now is. So it's not an easy position at all for him to be in, with Labour MPs suggesting, in some cases, using this term, that they want regime change in number 10. Though, do I really think that's about the individuals, or is it actually a proxy for unease with the direction being pursued by this Prime Minister?
Thank you, Henry. I'm sure we will be, I think, talking about this again quite soon. Catherine, who do you blame for all of this? I mean, it's a shambles, isn't it?
I think Labour MPs are doing their job. They're engaging with their constituents. I've had people come and visit me in my constituency and in my advice surgeries, and I've put down written parliamentary questions, and some of those are similar to some of the issues that have been raised, and I'll have those answers before the vote. But it is absolutely right that you are trying to make legislation as good as it can be, and I'm really pleased that ministers are listening, engaging, and the engagement won't end after Tuesday. We know that they are looking at a number of reviews, including on the criteria when it comes to PIP assessments. And I'm really pleased that we are actually seeing a debate which looks at the real value of universal credit and PIP for those in work and out of work. And that is a far cry from a lot of the rhetoric that we saw in previous years from the Conservatives, who would often use language like benefit scroungers and skivers. That is not what we're talking about.
Let's just stick with how this has been handled, because I've heard MPs saying that number 10 just wasn't listening. You're saying MPs were doing their job. That's probably right. But the fact that Number 10 weren't actually listening to their complaints, and now it's got to this quite late stage. We can hear Keir Starmer actually from yesterday. He was in the Netherlands at a summit, and he was asked about the fact that so many of his MPs are opposed to his planned welfare cuts.
Is it tough going? Are there plenty of people and noises off? Yes, of course. There always are, there always have been, there always will be. But the important thing is to focus on the change that we want to bring about.
I mean, noise is off, he says. That was insulting to a lot of MPs, really. It sounds a bit tone deaf.
I think that welfare is a hugely important topic, and of course it's going to have a lot of people debating and engaging and trying to make sure we do this right. And I do think that the engagement that we've had is really constructive, and I think that that is everyone doing their jobs.
But do you think the Prime Minister was right there to get, that tone right? I mean, there's a Times headline here today saying call for regime change as Keir Starmer aide faces welfare backlash. There are Labour MPs blaming Morgan McSweeney, one of his most senior advisors, saying simply hasn't been listening and has alienated lots of MPs.
I think that people are doing what they can to try and ensure we get this right. And I've certainly seen engagement from the beginning from ministers. And I think that what they're trying to do, the principles that they are trying to put into place are the right ones.
OK, we'll come to the rest of the panel in a second. But first of all, let's listen to Ben Chew, who has looked at the details of this and what exactly it is that the government is trying to do. Ben.
Yes, Vicky, so let's drill down in a bit more detail at what the government's welfare reforms are, which are prompting such resistance from Labour MPs. And there are two main elements. First, a cut in the rate of incapacity benefit. This is for people who are generally economically inactive. Second, to make it harder for people to claim personal independence payments, or PIP. These are support payments for people with a disability, and importantly, are around a fifth of the people claiming PIP are working. And together, these two reforms are projected to save about £5 billion a year by 2030. But the government's own impact assessment says these reforms could push around 250,000 people, including 50,000 children, into relative income poverty by the end of the decade. But here's some further very important context. This shows total spending on working age disability benefits from the Office for Budget Responsibility, the official forecaster. At last autumn's budget, you can see it shown in red here. It was projected to increase from around 60 billion this year to around 75 billion by 2030, so an increase of around £15 billion. But here's the latest forecast from the OBR shown in blue, which factor in those planned cuts. And as you can see, the bill is still rising to about £72 billion by 2030. It's just going up slightly less rapidly. And this reflects the fact that even with the plans to make it harder for people to access personal independence payments, the government thinks the number of people claiming it will continue to grow. This gives a sense of the pressure the system is putting on the public finances and why the government feels a need to tackle it. Vicky.
Thanks very much, Ben. Neil, do you think that spending on welfare does need to come down? I mean, Ben's pointing out there that even with these changes, it does still increase. Does your party think it should go further?
It clearly needs to come down. We've got to make some difficult choices around public spending. We're living in an increasingly uncertain and unstable world. That means we need to invest more in our defence, for example. That's going to mean some difficult decisions across governmental spending. So it is the right thing to do to tackle the welfare state. We need to get more people back into work. What we saw under the Conservative government, there were 4 million people back in work since we took office in 2010. Unemployment has now gone up by 10%. But one of the big challenges facing the government isn't just pushing through welfare reform, it's having the jobs for people to go into. And we've seen the consequence of some of their economic decisions, but also the Employment Rights Bill has made it much harder for businesses to grow and therefore recruit. That's going to be an additional challenge. But this is a real challenge for Keir Starmer's leadership. And I say that because he's marched his troops up the hill once over winter fuel payments. They've made that sacrifice. It's been pretty uncomfortable, I suspect, for them with their inbox with constituents. He then marched them back down the hill. Now, they are going to push back on this, and if he can't get his troops over the line, Catherine says he's been consulting with them alongside his ministers. Well, he's clearly failed to land the right pitch.
Liz, Neil thinks that the welfare bill needs to come down. What do you say to that?
If we could just look at exactly what PIP does. It's not an employment benefit. It is to enable people to afford the extra costs that come about.
But just start with a broad thing. Do you think the welfare bill needs, the amount we spend on welfare should come down or not?
Every government should always be looking at this, but at the same time we want to look at what the effect...
Or do you want to spend more on welfare?
Now, I particularly, because I'm here with Plaid Cymru, we have actually requested that the government do a particular assessment on Wales, because this isn't just going to affect individuals. But if you're looking at a situation, and the estimate is for Wales, that it will take 470 million out of the community's economies in which the 190,000 people who are likely to be affected by this would otherwise be spending. Now,
so you want to spend, would you want to spend more on welfare?
We need to know the effect that this will have. And the rhetoric that we've had, and we had this from the Tories, and it's been inherited now with Labour as well, is that people who can't work are somehow to blame for their condition. That is not the case with disabled people. We will have all had people come to us saying, this is what enables me to work, that I am in receipt of PIP.
But are you saying that you don't want it to be cut, the bill, in this way? Because PIP, you think that should stay? Or are you saying you think the welfare bill is fine as it is?
I think
Can you answer that? You're not answering my question.
The reality of people's needs in our communities, if we want to get people back into work, the way this is being approached is punitive.
So how would you do it?
We need to actually look at what people's needs are. I understand that there will be more money spent on how to get people back into work, but I want to see how that operates. And then there will be
So you want that bit, but this is the point.
Yeah,
you want the bit of helping people back to work, but you think the benefits should stay as they are.
There will be communities within post-industrial areas. Much of Wales is post-industrial. We'll be talking about mining later on. There are certain areas. What will the employment opportunities actually be?
But would you like to see that first? So put that money in first to help with employment? But then would you say then you can cut the benefits?
Everybody
like
wants to get people back into work, but there will be people in our community who can't work. Are we going to force them into additional poverty? And then that wider assessment of what that effect is going to be on those the communities in which they live, where there will be higher proportions in some than in others. And that has been refused to us in Wales, even though our First Minister asked for it.
But it sounds like you want it to stay as it is, or to continue to go up, actually, the welfare bill, because it will.
There is a reality of people's needs in our communities that if we're going to force them into poverty, we were talking about the effect that this will happen on children as well.
Yeah.
That the effect that this is likely to have really matters. We need to know what that is.
Alex.
Well, we're basically the only developed economy that hasn't recovered worklessness since the COVID pandemic. And when you look at the cohorts who are out of work and where the demographic shifts has happened, it's especially with young people, 18 to 25-year-olds. That is unforgivable. I see very few reasons why the average 18 to 25-year-old is not engaged as part of our workforce, is not contributing to our economy. I think we really need to look at some of those barriers and actually assess why societally, it seems to me, there's been a complete change of attitude towards going and getting a job. And when you balance it out with looking at the record levels of inward migration we've been having, and I'm talking legal migration here, you have to appreciate that something chronically wrong is going on in our economy when you're bringing in 400,000 plus people every year to fill up jobs, and so many 18 to 25-year-olds, 1 in 4 of them, are not working.
Liz, what do you say about that, the 18 to 25-year-olds? I mean, you've talked about people in your community who can't work and the post-industrial environment, but that's not what we're talking about here. These are young people who are not working. Have you seen the cuts
in further education and actually supporting young people into further work? And I must take issue with this overgeneral remark about people coming in as legal migration. If we didn't have legal migrants in the NHS, in Wales, and I imagine in many other places in England as well, in the here and now, people would die. People would suffer.
Why are we not lifting the cap on training doctors? Why are we forcing nurses to have to go and get university degrees? Why are we not using our own workforce? What I'm saying, and I'm not making this tired, tropish argument about immigration and the NHS. We know immigrants contribute to the NHS. What I'm saying is it is ridiculous that we've got record levels of worklessness in that particular demographic who should be able-bodied, who should be inspired, enthusiastic about entering careers, contributing to the economy, and we're bringing in record levels of people from other countries. That is ridiculous. That's not sustainable. This isn't about the NHS. If you would have let me finish rather than go into...
Let's answer. Can you answer the question about young people, particularly, not being in work?
Yes, with young people not being in work, I come from a background in further education. I have seen the funding, particularly for vocational education, be cut and cut and cut. It's cut here in England. It is cut in Wales as well. I have seen universities reducing their courses. At one stage, the University...
And you're saying that's why they're not in work?
The University of Cardiff was at one stage not going to teach nurses anymore. The numbers that we can teach in Bangor University are reduced. yes, of course, we need to develop people through. But since COVID, which has hit this generation particularly hard because they had months, if not longer, out of any contact of education.
And do you think that's why many of them are on PIP, for example, or do you think that's why they're on welfare?
Effect. We are in a society that somehow believes that we can't, that we don't pay to bring people forward, to develop people, that we can use a stick against them. We are now suffering the consequences of that.
OK, Catherine, do you think that the welfare bill should be actually going down rather than going up?
I think that the focus in terms of getting people back to work is absolutely right, and where I will agree with colleagues on the panel is that we do have 1 in 8 young people who are going straight into being reliant upon benefits who aren't in education, training or work, and I'm not prepared to give up on them. This government isn't prepared to give up on them. One of the things that I was really pleased with our industrial strategy was £100 million to get more people into engineering. There is such an exciting...
But I think everyone here agrees that more people, if they can work, should be going back to work.
Yes,
but the question is about the welfare bill. We saw the figures there from Ben Chu showing that it's still going to go up, even if these cuts get through. Do you think that's OK?
I think it will keep going up. I think that we do need to make sure people are supported. I think that there's a really important safety net around them. I think that what this government is trying to do is to be using that money to ensure that we are supporting people properly, that we're supporting people properly who cannot work and will never be able to work, and that we're getting more people into work, because we are losing out on the talents of so many people right now. And I think if we can make sure we get that support right, we will have all of them be a part of what's really exciting with the industrial strategy, what's really exciting with the investment coming into our country. And I want everyone in Derby and across the country to actually take a piece of that.
In terms of what the government is proposing here, which is personal independence payments that we heard about there, do you think that they are an disincentive to some people to going back to work?
I think that's exactly part of the reason where we need to see positive change, because I do think that we've ended up in a system that pushes people away from work or penalises them when they're giving it a chance and when they're really, really trying, and we need to take that away. That's why actually getting on with some welfare reform is so important, and I want to see it done along the principles that we've been talking about, this government wants to see, and a big part of that is right to be focusing on getting people back to work.
I mean, you must have constituents who come to you, and some will be concerned that this is going to be taken away from them. But are there people who are claiming PIP at the moment that you think shouldn't be claiming it? I mean, it's not an out-of-work benefit, but 1 in 6 people claiming these benefits, PIP, then they're the ones that are working. 1 in 6.
Yeah.
Most aren't.
And I think the 1 in 6, what we need to ensure is that actually they stay in work and they're able to stay in work. And I think for far too long, they haven't seen the support that they need, the personalised support to be able to work. And so many people that I meet absolutely want that. In Derby, we're the local authority with the largest deaf population in the entire country. And actually access to work can be so difficult, and it does mean that we lose out on their talents. So I think that it's right that our welfare system is a proper safety net, but that it is reformed to ensure that it is lifting people up so they can play their part in the economy. So
if you take away, it amounts to hundreds of pounds for lots of people a month, if you take away their PIP, how does that help get them back into work?
Well, the fastest route out of poverty for so many people is to ensure that they get back into work or get into work for the first time. So we've got to do
But you
both.
don't lose PIP by doing that, do you? You can still get PIP if you work.
I mean, I think things come back to the principles we're actually trying to see, which is for those who cannot, they have more support and they're not subjected to more reassessments. So that shouldn't change, and we want to ensure that that doesn't change, and that's something we want to drive forward. But I do think that everyone on this panel has agreed that we need to see people getting back to work, and I think that hasn't been happening for far, far too long, and that does take time and support, and that's what the government's trying to get right.
Yes?
I think that to come back to the national and the regional question, we've got to look at what sort of jobs are available. I mean, again, what I've heard for possibly the jobs that the government is anticipating that people might go into from benefits, we've seen the national insurance contribution increases. We've seen, welcome in many ways, the minimum wage increases. So what I'm having now is employers telling me that I'm actually cutting back on the number of people that we can employ. And again, without having a sense of those areas where this will affect most, I think this government is taking a great leap into the dark. And at the same time, exactly, I have constituents come to me who say it's because of PIP that I can actually work. And now they're afraid that that's going to be taken away from them.
What would you say to that, Kath?
I think that what is right is the importance in making sure that people have got good work. We've seen wages going up in 10 months more than we saw under the Conservatives in 10 years. And I think it's also fantastic. It's part of the package that we've seen pensions going up as well and waiting lists coming down, that we're getting breakfast clubs rolled out and that we're seeing free lunches actually extended for all of those on universal credit. That makes a big difference, the money going into people's pockets.
OK, let's take a look at this headline in The Times. Kemi Badenoch takes inspiration from Denmark on migrant integration. And these are comments that she made in a question and answer event earlier this week. Now, what is the Danish model that she is talking about? Well, documentary maker Simon Reeve recently visited Denmark as part of his series on Scandinavia. He spoke to an immigrant who has lived in Denmark since 1975 and then an MP from the governing coalition. Let's take a look.
Partly in response to the crime wave in Sweden and terrorism here, Denmark's taken a really tough line on integration. Not just encouraging it, but pushing it. Islamic full-face coverings are banned. The government even introduced what was called a ghetto law, aimed at preventing neighbourhoods being dominated by so-called non-Western immigrants, along with high crime and unemployment.
Let's get out. Yes, go and have a look.
One designated ghetto was the multicultural neighbourhood Mjolnerparken, where Mohammed raised his family.
What's particularly extraordinary, unusual, extreme perhaps about this law is the identification of non-Western. It's basically saying that if you're not from Western Europe or some of the English-speaking countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc., then you can be classed as non-Western, and the state, as a result, treats you differently.
This was classed as a ghetto because more than 50% of people came from non-Western backgrounds. To reduce that number, some families were actually forced to relocate. Mohammed's was one of them.
På anden sal, der hvor der er den stol, det var vores hjem. Det var her.
Are you okay?
I'm okay.
You'd rather not look at it?
Ja, når man ser på det, hver gang man kommer forbi, så bliver man jo påvirket.
So you're saying this is an attempt to enforce and impose fundamental Danish values?
Yes, because we want everybody that lives here have a good life.
But what you're talking about is painful for some people. You are literally requiring people to move out of their homes. You are creating a lot of trauma for some people.
I don't think you always can say trauma because not many are getting evicted.
But I've met somebody who who's crying because of what's happened.
Yes, I know. If you have to have a society as ours, you have to be aware of what's keep us together than what's taking us apart. And the thing that could take us apart is if people were living parallel to each other in restricted areas where there only were people of non-Western. You couldn't get any integration because who should integrate those people in the Danish society? You have to have Danes to integrate these people into our society, to give them our values and the feelings of our values, because they're universal for us, these values.
And you can watch the whole of that documentary called Scandinavia by Simon Reeve. It's on the iPlayer. Neil, your leader, Kemi Badenoch, has said that she is looking at the policy, and it's one of the things she will be talking more about. And she makes the point, of course, that Denmark is different to the UK. But do you think she should be looking at it?
Look, I think we are going through a policy review at the moment, and it's important that we look at how other systems operate to try and develop best practice so that when we put forward our settled view, we've consulted the evidence. Now, I came from a family where my father emigrated from India back in the 1970s, so I'm really cognizant of the importance of integration in our society. And I think we've got to level with the British people. There's a real risk we talk in politics in absolutism. We talk about something as black or something as white. There's a huge amount of grayscale in the conversations that we have, and we shouldn't be afraid of having difficult conversations, particularly around society, in order to ensure that we've got that a proactive approach to integration.
Because that's the distinction Kemi Badenoch makes, that she says that until now we've had what she calls passive integration, and she wants it to be more active. I mean, what would you see that as meaning?
Well, look, I use the direct example of my father, who very much came over here, worked in the NHS for over 40 years as a general practitioner. And his view was, you don't come to another country and use it as a marketplace. Yes, you respect your heritage and your values, but you integrate into society by assimilating with the societal norms, by respecting the institutions, respecting the cultural values that hold that society. Because you've actively come to a country, you are hoping to gain something by it. The way we should be doing that, as if I moved to another country myself, is to integrate myself into it, learn the language, learn the customs, and be part of it. What we don't want to see is people come into this country and not being part of society. That is a very dangerous place to be.
And do you think that's happening?
I think there are parts of this country where we talk much about multiculturalism, but actually multiculturalism is distinct from integration. And we are seeing parts of this country where there is not integration as it should be, and that is damaging to the fabric of society.
And how far should the state go in terms of dealing with that? If you see what is happening in Denmark, clearly there was a man there who was very upset about the fact that they are moving people out of some areas. Do you think that's going too far?
Well, look, I think we've got to look at the evidence as a whole. I think, this is one example of how Denmark are doing it. There are other models elsewhere. We have to have a very sympathetic approach to it, but we can't shy away from these difficult conversations. And unfortunately, we've seen the consequence over this over too many years. There have been societal breakdowns, and this is one of the factors that is associated with it. If we don't get a grip of it, we're going to see our cultural heritage, but also our societies break down. So I think it's very sensible for Kemi to have what is a grown-up debate, and I think we should do so in a respectful way, but it's something that we should be looking at and putting forward to the public when we get a settled view.
Catherine, we heard the Danish MP there, who's from the Social Democratic Party, talking about a parallel society. Keir Starmer talked about an island of strangers. Do you think that there needs to be more done?
He said we didn't want to become an island of strangers, and of course community cohesion and integration is important, and the government are taking steps to look at English requirements. But we absolutely can't lose sight of the contribution for decades that we have seen from immigration. I'm a Derby MP and really proud of that contribution, which isn't just in the NHS but also in our industries, and so.
But I don't think anyone's necessarily arguing with that, are they? They're talking about how much you adopt,
and it's about how you
the culture of the country.
And I think that language is a huge part of that, to enable people to fully be able to appreciate and be a part of our communities, and I think that's right. But I certainly wouldn't want to see kind of pulling down, tearing down or emptying properties when we've had so little building of especially social housing and affordable housing for so long. And I'd much rather welcome, as I do, the 39 billion that we'll see to build more affordable and social housing.
Alex, what do you make of what you saw in that documentary? And do you think it applies in any way to what's happening in this country?
Of course it applies to this country. We already have balkanised communities, and that spells out a great peril for the future of societal integration. And you've got similar policies being adopted in Sweden. These are sort of proposals that are now being looked into across Europe because we've realised what's happened with levels of immigration and lack of integration. It's creating social disquiet and disharmony to the point in which people are even starting to use words such as civil war, for crying out loud. Now, I think there is nothing wrong with defending your national cultural mores, your communal morality, and I think that that's what we need to be doing. I fully agree we need to ban the full face covering, which they've done in Denmark. I think that is absolutely right. I think that is a barrier for integration if you're not making eye contact. English language is vitally important. I think we need to look at the amount of translation services we offer. I personally would go as far as getting rid of faith schools that are not Catholic or C of E, which tend to allow children from other faiths to come in, because I don't think taking children away and educating them primarily in their own cultural context is healthy. And I personally would also go as far as banning the slaughter of animals that haven't been pre-stunned. And I'd say to anybody who says, well, we don't like that and we demand exceptions because of what we want within our system, this is our country. We believe in animal welfare. We don't believe that women should be shamed for exposing their faces. And we believe little children should all play in a sandpit together. Simple.
Liz?
I'm going to have to react to the piece that we just saw from Simon Reeves, because we're talking about forced evictions there. And that's the comparison that we are discussing today. This is really bad stuff for us to be talking about in Europe. We've been here before. And when I came in, what I wanted to talk about actually was the fact that in Denmark, they are prepared, they're quite resigned to paying 46% of their income on taxation. We only spend 34% here, so that in Denmark, of course, there is much more money within the public services to try and integrate into communities. But what we're hearing, and we're hearing it today from Alex, is this rhetoric of division. Of course, we must find a way to bring our communities together.
So how do you do that?
A civil war.
No, I say other people have started saying that, and that's alarming. Rhetoric of division. I'm talking about making sure people are brought together and not divided.
You came on television and you used that term.
No, it's very clear.
She said other people had been saying it.
Reached the point that other people are warning of that. That's frightening.
A tactic of raising things and then countering it in that sort of term. But this language that we're using...
Do you think that there aren't divisions? Do you think that anything does need to be done, or you don't think that...
I think when we were talking about schools just now, you could equally apply that, and it'll be interesting next year with reforms policies about Welsh medium schools in Wales, quite frankly. Of course we have to have common values. Of course we have to have...
And how far should the state make sure that happens? In terms of speaking the same language?
Has a role in making communities safer. We don't have youth clubs anymore. We've lost libraries. 14 years of austerity, which this government are continuing. That has a direct effect on how our communities hang together. This high rhetoric just drives further divisions. If we really want to make a difference to our communities, we have to do the boring stuff, the expensive stuff. If we value community cohesion, which I think they actually do in many of the countries of Scandinavia, we don't get that on the cheap with a load of American-style divisive rhetoric.
Is this the danger, Neil, in Kemi Basingstoke looking at this? I mean, some of what's happening in Denmark has been criticised by human rights groups.
Look, Kemi hasn't said she's going to adopt the Denmark proposals wholesale. What she said is she's going to look at this issue. I think that's an eminently sensible thing to do. You're the leader of the opposition. You are formulating your policy platform. We know that this is a significant issue that comes up on the doorsteps up and down the country. There are tensions within our communities. I think if we pretend that there aren't, that would be disingenuous. And so it is quite right we look at what options are available in order to make sure that we have more societal cohesion. That is a sensible approach, and it's a grown-up approach.
OK, thank you. Now, Wimbledon starts next week, which means Politics Live will be on air at slightly different times over the next couple of weeks. These are the times next week, so put them in your diary. You can see that we are on air much earlier. We'll be getting out much earlier on Monday, Tuesday and Thursday. On Wednesday, we are on air at the usual time of 11:15. So please tune in for all of that. Now, let's take a look at this headline from the Daily Mail. Nigel Farage, speaking earlier this month, said a reform government would allow coal mines to reopen in Wales to revive British steelmaking and therefore reopen the Port Talbot steelworks. So Liz, should it happen? Should coal mining be restarted in Wales?
The communities who live with the heritage, the effects of coal mines, know that these will never be opened again. They also know, because they live with it, the suffering that was caused by coal mines. This is a sort of nostalgia politics that we can, if we tick this box, Nigel Farage says everything will be fine. It is somewhat ironic that Nigel Farage's stated hero or heroine is Margaret Thatcher, who was directly responsible for closing those pits. What we need now as we move ahead is, first of all, to clear the remains, the tips that's down there. This government, I think, has given us 180 million to do that. We probably need 3 times that to actually make a difference. This, of course, because climate change, which again, Reform have some issue with, is meaning that we have far more rain. Far more rain means that they're much more unstable, that these need to be removed. And these were there before devolution. We need to find alternative work for those post-industrial communities. And if you were to get me started on Port Talbot...
We'll come back to that.
We'll come back to
that.
Okay,
Alex, coal mines. I mean, this is not feasible, is it?
It's well worth exploring. As for its feasibility, I don't know. I don't know whether the seams that are easily extracted have been exhausted. I don't know whether things have been built over some of those old seams. I don't know about the commercial viability of how much it costs to scale these operations up, and then how much worth our own fossil fuels are in terms of coal. Whether that's going to be more expensive than actually importing cheap ones, I don't know is the answer. But what we do know is we're living in an era where we've got the highest energy bills in the world. We've deindustrialised, and that is not sustainable. You know, actually, when you look at the cost of energy, it impacts on everything. It impacts on the individual's cost of living. It impacts upon how much a hospital's got to spend on its energy bills, everything. And if we can get that under control, that in many respects will be a silver bullet for the entire economy. So it is worth exploring this. Is
it all about nostalgia? Is it nostalgia? This is why Nigel Farage is doing this?
I don't think it is. I think it's looking at the sort of things going on in America and other countries where they've sort of, you know, taken a step back from net zero targets and realised actually that we are going to need to explore ways in which we maintain, or not maintain, bring down energy costs to an affordable level. And if that means looking into the possibility of be it fracking, be it coal mining, I think it is worth exploring.
Catherine, bringing down energy bills? Most people would agree with that, wouldn't they?
If I can, I'm a Derbyshire MP, and of course I am so proud of the coal mining heritage. But I don't want to be focusing on mining. I want to be looking at high-tech, high-value jobs in future industries. I want to be looking at the kind of Rolls-Royce who are developing small modular reactors. And we've got 200 extra jobs coming in Derby with Valent, who does heat pumps. And I want the grandchildren of people who were miners to be getting those good, high-skilled jobs in the industries of the future. In Wales, I think we've got 38,000 people who are employed in jobs connected to net zero. I don't think a reform really saying let's get rid of those jobs. I think we've got to look forward.
Net zero jobs rather than mining?
Everything is all a balance, isn't it? We keep talking about an energy mix. I'm not an expert, OK, on what those 38,000 net zero jobs are and whether they could also have additional jobs. No one's saying you have to get rid of those jobs necessarily to create other jobs, were we to look at things such as the extraction of fossil fuels. My grandfather was a geologist. I am not. I don't know the plausibility of reopening mines in Wales, but I think in this day and age, when you look at those energy bills, when you look at the actions of other countries, it is worth exploring.
But it is where you put your investment. And it is so important that we have clean, secure energy, that we're not relying upon foreign fossil fuels.
I worked as part of an Anglo-American consortium on SMRs, small modular reactors, so I'm fully for that technology. I agree with you entirely.
And the 2.5 billion that this government are putting in is absolutely fantastic, and that will lead to really good quality jobs and actually mean that we no longer are seeing such dependence on what can be really hostile players like Russia.
No.
Look, we've got to do more to shore up our national energy security, but frankly, this plan is economically illiterate. It's to get the headlines, but there's no substance behind it, as we're finding with a lot of reform policies nowadays.
OK, thank you very much. That is all for today. I'll be back on Monday with more Politics Live at, as we've said, the much earlier time of 9:45 here on BBC Two and iPlayer. So do set your alarm clocks. I will be.